Hello, this is Dr. Cynthia First from the University of Utah, and today I'd like to talk about an introduction to the flipped classroom as part of our Teach Flipped program. People often ask me, so this flipped classroom, you've seen about it in the news, is it just the next buzz? We've heard about hybrid classrooms and technology-assisted classrooms, and of course many of us have been teaching traditionally for years. So let's go beyond the buzz, and let's talk about what is actually known to improve learning and how that applies to the flipped classroom. Active learning is one of the key strategies for me in being able to improve students' learning. That's where you engage every student every moment of your class by having them in small group discussions, directly involved in problem solving or activities, every student, every day, every minute. That's my goal. Problem-based learning is one way to do that. That's where you provide a very interesting problem, probably a large problem in context, where the students need to know a lot of information in order to be able to solve it. PBL students consistently outperform traditional students on long-term retention of information when they do this type of learning. Short-term retention may not be as much affected. Problem solving, higher level thinking, and lifelong learning also are increased. Real-world applications and bringing those into your classroom is clearly a motivation for students. Imagine a basic calculus class where all you see is math instead of how it's used in the real world. That's pretty difficult for students. So bringing real-world applications definitely helps them be more engaged in their learning. Supplemental instruction is where you have information outside the class. These are sessions often run by TAs or other faculty where you are able to do problems and work the homework outside of class. It's particularly good for students that are struggling or students who need basic remediation. Tutoring and individual instruction is also very good. You can imagine that if you could have an individual teacher for every student, perhaps that would be ideal. But that's very difficult to accomplish, so many schools have brought in peer tutoring programs, and those are seen to improve students and to improve students' learning and also to reduce their failure and dropout rates. So here are 5 things that are known to improve learning that all become part of the flipped classroom because you have more time with your students. So here's my challenge. I wanted to do active learning in class, and in fact I was, but I always found that I wasn't able to get through all of the material that I felt I really needed to in my lecture in order to have enough time for the students to be doing active learning. I love problem-based learning, where they're able to do large problems in context. This is great in engineering because engineers are supposed to build things, and bringing in real-world applications clearly motivates my students. But having enough time for all of those things in my classroom was very difficult because they needed a lot of basic information before they could even begin to have a discussion. SI and tutoring are great, but they cost a lot of money, and I was able to do a little, but I didn't have the budget for all I wanted. So before I flipped, I've taught a good solid traditional classroom. It's 50 minutes 3 times a week, and then the students go home and they spend another hour or 2 each day working on homework problem solving. At our university, we're typically a commuter campus. Most of our students do study alone. Each week, they also have a 3-hour hands-on lab that lets me bring a lot of context and really apply what they're learning. When I flip my class, here's the concept of flipping. What used to be inside the class is out. The lecture is now a video lecture that the students watch before class, and what used to be outside of the class, or the homework and problem solving, is now where I spend my time with the students in class. You flip what used to be in and what used to be out. I began in 2007 with a senior/graduate level numerical electromagnetics class with about 30 to 40 students. It worked great, so I tried it in 2009 with my 80-person junior level required electromagnetics class, a very theoretical class that a lot of students could struggle with. That also has worked tremendously well, so this year in 2014 I flipped my freshman circuits course. That's a class of about 120 students, and this also has been very successful. So let me show you what a day is like in my flipped classroom. There are many different ways of flipping a classroom, and mine is just one, but I'll give you a sample. So before class, the students watch video lectures. Typically, those lectures are now about 20 minutes long. What used to be 50 minutes compresses to 20 minutes with no introduction and with no beginning material and no repetition. The students watch the video the night before. Most watch it 1 time, but some up to 3 times. They typically repeat segments as needed, and they take notes. When they come to class, the most important thing is don't lecture. You'll waste the time of the students who spent the time watching the lecture if you do. Sure, there are a few students, 10 to 15%, who haven't watched the lecture, and that's just kind of tough love, and they can watch it later when they go home. I I do a quick student-driven review at the beginning of class. I have a portfolio question of the day, which is really my learning objective, such as what is the electric field and how do you solve Coulomb's law in these particular situations. The students are expected to take notes on that and write their answers as they go through the video, and that's what I use to start the class at the beginning of the day. The portfolio question, what is the electric field? Typically students will give me the basic answers you expect, like it goes from two charges, like from positive to negative. They give me the math, they might draw the textbook picture, they might describe the equations, but inevitably the good questions start to rise, such as, how do you measure it? What does it do? How do we know it's there? What can we use it for? And my favorite question of all time is, well, Dr. First, this field, it's not really there, right? It's just a mathematical construct, right? That's a really good question for a professor to be able to answer. My goal with teaching Flipped was to increase the higher level thinking skills of my students. I wanted to take them from just remembering and even understanding the material to be able to apply it, analyze it, evaluate it, and then to be able to create something with it. There are other reasons that you might choose to flip your class, such as making sure that fewer students fail. Then I begin with small group problem solving. Here is an example from their homework, and I have them think about how we talked about doing this in the lecture, and then work with their nearest neighbors. These are not in little tables, they're just a stadium classroom, to work with their nearest neighbors to begin solving this problem. What happens is the first couple of minutes are pretty quiet while they're just looking at the problem and sort of considering what to do. By about minutes 3 and 4, it starts to get noisy as they talk to each other, and I wander the room, much as this professor is, and see how it's doing. I just look over their shoulders to see how it's going. Pretty soon, the problems start to arise, and they give me the simple problems, the simple questions. I'll answer those right away. But a lot of times they've started to hit the gnarly problem that they're not quite sure how to handle, and then I'll say, oh, hang on just a second, I'll stop the class. And then at about 4 to 5 to 6 minutes, I do stop the class because most students have hit the gnarly part of the problem, and we can talk about it. It gives me a chance to really talk about problem-solving strategy and not just exactly the numbers that go into that problem. So then we do it again, and we may do this several times throughout the day, throughout the class, where we'll have another problem a little harder. They get started on that one. When they hit the gnarly things, we talk about it. It's like just-in-time learning. What I'm trying to do is get them to go beyond equation shopping. Instead of just looking at all the equations and figuring where to plug in the numbers, I do point out the familiar resources from the textbook and how to use them, when to use them, and where they came from, the evaluation. So I try to get them beyond just shopping for those basic equations. And then there's my favorite part of the day. I usually hold the last 5 to 10 minutes of class to talk about real-world engineering applications, such as this helicopter lineman who grounds himself against these very high voltage lines. I talk about what can you create with this stuff, and it generates a lot of discussion. Then students go home after class. They clean up their portfolio notes. I let them use them on the exam. They finish their homework. Most problems were set up, but the hard parts were discussed, but they still need to get out their calculator, finish them up, clean them up, and be sure they understand them. Many students rewatch all or parts of the lecture video, and they watch the video for the next day's class. Here's what the students like about the flipped classroom. They say the video lectures are easy to watch. They're appealing. You can repeat what you miss. Go at your own speed. They like that it's on their schedule. They make the book easier to understand. And interestingly, even though they do not see me in those video lectures, there's a sample on the website, they say, I feel like you are at my shoulder. It's as if I were writing and speaking to them. In class, they like that it gives them better understanding. I answer their questions, I help them understand the homework, and they like the real stuff, and they often say, I no longer feel stupid asking questions. This also has worked for many of my special needs students, such as those who are hearing impaired and can put on the closed captioning, English as a second language students who can speed up or slow down the videos, and they can put closed captioning on in English, which they usually find easier to read than hear, or their own native language. I also wonder if the fact that the videos are recorded by me, one of the few women professors in our department, if the voice that I have, the only voice, the girl voice, may help other students feel as if they have women professors too. This is what happened to my teaching evaluations. The students do indeed like this class. In 2007, I was getting very good teaching evaluations, 5.1 out of 6. That's a good teaching evaluations. But immediately after flipping the class and making no other changes, they jumped up to nearly 6 out of 6. We made a change between 2010 and 2011 in how classes were evaluated, and there were some challenges with the evaluations at this time. In particular, the students weren't able to tell if they were evaluating me or my TA, and there were many comments about he did this or he did that. So understandably, the evaluations in 2011 and 12 are more confusing. Take them with a grain of salt. Let me show you what happened in the freshman class this year. We did several surveys. In fact, I surveyed the students every 3 weeks to find out how the class was going for them. I wanted to know if they were watching the video lectures, and in fact, 3.5, which would be between often and very often. Did they use the textbook? Sometimes to often. How often did they come to class? Often to very often. And how often did they do homework with others? Still, not very often. I asked which resources they found most helpful for them to learn. They listed the video examples and the in-class examples and the labs. Not surprising with any of those. The textbook and then in-class homework solving, the TA, other online material, and the professor's office hours. I guess I need to have more office hours. Then I asked, where did you ask a question? The biggest change I've noted between teaching in a traditional way and teaching in the flipped classroom was that the students ask a lot more questions. So in the lab they had asked questions. They'd asked questions of another student in class, not been shy to ask. They'd asked directly, they'd gone to TA or tutoring hours, and they had raised their hand in class. The least popular were raising your hand in class, the online discussion board, and email, but still, a quarter of the students had asked questions that way. The biggest difference I noticed when I switched to the flipped class was that students asked more and better questions. Here's what happened with the course evaluations in the freshman class. The evaluations were very high, 5.67 out of 6 from 115 students. 81% of them passed the class. 20 of the students did drop or not participate in the class. Here's an example of the comments that they had. The flipped classroom worked very well for me. I loved watching the lectures at home where I could replay the parts I did not understand and watch them several times at my convenience. I liked solving problems and doing cool projects like the one with the cards and the op-amps. So I hope that you will join us for the Teach Flip program. Check it out online. We run this regularly, nearly every semester at this point, to be able to help you learn to flip your class. We have 6 modules, one on an introduction to flipping, one on pedagogy and what others are doing in your discipline, creating online videos, active learning, designing your flip classroom, and assessing the flip. So thank you very much for joining me, and please do feel free to send me email if there are any things I can do to help you flip your class.